Slow down, you move too fast. Gotta make the morning last. Kicking down the cobblestones, looking for fun and feeling groovy. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum, feeling groovy.
Well, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the bridge. We are on episode 83 this morning. And Sandy, I wanted to tell you that actually we've got almost 93 subscribers right now. So
Whoa!
we better have a
Remember that.
party when we get to 100, huh?
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome. We've got Nathan Belcher with us again today. And the last time Nathan was on, I was muted, so I couldn't talk. So I'm just dying to get started here. But Sandy, have you got a quote to start us out with?
I sure do. So many of you know who Tony Robbins is. He's the positive guru about what to do with life and how to do it well. He said, you've got to be in it to win it. You can't stand on the sidelines. You have to be in it. So it's a good thought process for today.
Absolutely. Well, Nathan, not everybody was with us last time, including me. Why don't you give us a little background of who you are and your company, and then we'll kind of get started. I know I've got a plethora of questions.
Wonderful. Yeah, just want to say thanks, Sue and Sandy, for having me on. Definitely enjoyed the first one and looking forward to another great chat.
Yeah.
So again, Nathan Belcher. So I was a teacher and a coach in the US and in Singapore for about 15 years. And I taught mostly high school physics classes and coached soccer, but I've done a lot of other things in terms of teaching and coaching and playing various sports myself. And then as my family and I decided to leave Singapore, we were just trying to figure out what to do. And one of the passion projects that I have is to help people learn how to learn. So that was something that became very interesting to me during my doctoral work, and have really just continued to, or as the last couple of years after I finished that, and really put that into the 6 or 7 years of my teaching. And then once I was leaving teaching full-time K-12, trying to figure out how to help people learn how to learn all different areas. So basically came up with, and maybe a little too much, but sort of 8 different types of people, or people that are in different industries this could be very useful, and have created short courses, have created a 3-hour graduate level course through President Pacific University. And so it's all the information on kind of that is on my website. The company's name is The Learning Engine, because again, as we're in it to win it, as Sandy just said, we really want to focus on doing things. And so an engine to me was, I think, an appropriate metaphor for how we learn, and one of the ways that we can think about the learning process is just in general. So yeah, looking forward to today. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Well, one thing as you're talking that jumps out at me, I mean, I know as a leadership coach, I'm always encouraging people to, you have an idea, jump in and do it, because you're not going to know. And boy, if that isn't true with learning,
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm going to say need to, but in order to learn how I learn, I need to kind of dive in and explore how do I learn? How do I not learn? And, how can I grow?
Mhm.
And so, the in it to win it is good. And we kind of have to dive into that learning water.
Sure.
So before we kind of get started, I'm curious. I remember last time you have lots of visuals.
Mhm.
You're very much a visual teacher,
Mhm.
and I'm sure that helps a lot of learners. What do you consider yourself as you think about types of learners? What kind of a learner are you?
So, that's an interesting point. And I think that I think we all have preferences. I think that there are definitely ways that, some of the research has shown with some of the learning style stuff, that people have preferences for different ways. But I think that to be totally frank, I think everybody actually learns through all different ways. So we have to, again, if we're listening to something, let's say again on a podcast, somebody's just listening to this versus kind of watching us. There's different ways that we receive information through audio than studying visuals. There's lots of work. I think Richard Meyer is the guy's name, where he's got a whole bunch of information around how do you actually present slides in a way that is not overwhelming, because, we've all been in the meetings where somebody just like posts a slide with 55 words and then just read it to us. And we're like, well, okay, what was the point of that? Right. And so that's not helping anybody out. And so, there, and then of course, again, we're blessed to have eyesight and to be able to look at things, having graphics, whether they're simple graphics or complex graphics, those are obviously different ways to do it. And then, I think as well, we all have to be able to have the back and forth conversation. There's being able to interrogate, whether it's a text, whether you're reading, as you're interrogating the author as you read, you're writing notes in the margins or on a piece of paper. That's one way to do it. Rather than just passively sort of running your eyes over the page. And so I think that every person actually needs all of those modalities. And I think that's actually something really important, even as we're teaching or coaching in any, or, or leading in any way, just telling somebody and having them get it right away. The funny point is I have small daughters or I have young daughters at this moment. And so sometimes I get a little chatty and it's just like, wait a second, they don't have the ability to the 30 seconds I just gave them is like, no, that was not what we needed. They needed 4 seconds and we get on with it. And so it's good to remember that in any sort of leadership situation.
Sure. Well, when you start, because I'm going to ask you, I'm going to tell you what I know a little bit about graphics and how I'm not opposed to it, but I don't think it's one of my strengths. And so I kind of want you to unpack that for me, because what I know is I know I'm very auditory. So even though we're doing a podcast, I do fine with just listening to podcasts. Yeah. And the other thing is I think I'm very hands-on. And auditory learners I know need to discuss things. Yeah. So, I'm a discusser. And then hands-on, meaning I kind of have to get my hands dirty and make some mistakes before I start learning. And I used to say a long time ago that I learned backwards. And that was why I said that, was because I kind of had to, get my hands dirty and mess with it. And then the learning would come. So what questions do you have for me, or how can you coach me into?
I think that's great. And so I think that's, again, that's kind of how the learning process goes. We all have to try to figure out the important things that we're having, or maybe not even important. We have to try to have conversations, again, whether it's with somebody else or whether it's with, again, reading a text or as you're listening to somebody talk, and you're basically creating schema in your brain, which then I call it conceptual models. But basically you're putting all these things together and you're starting to link them and to build them and to organize all of the information in your brain. And that's truly the learning process. And so, again, even if it looks like somebody's like learning quickly or they can do something just like this, they did that entire process a long time ago. Or, or they have some familiarity with the information and knowledge and skills that's being shared. No matter who it is in the world, if they come up to something that's brand new, the learning process happens the same way. Just as we get older and get more experienced, again, as you study, as you go deeper with one topic, and then as you kind of go wide with other topics, you can then start to connect the topic that you have a lot of depth with to those other topics. And so it looks like you knew already what you had, right? But it's not that. It's that you already have a ton of knowledge and skills about a lot of different things in life. And so then you're able to apply that easily, or more easily than somebody who is, again, age 8 or age 12, that's like never seen this thing before.
Sure.
And so I would say another interesting point about the sort of getting your hands dirty and then connecting that to the auditory ideas is doing something like a sketch note. Like basically, I think it's really fun. And I'll say one of the teachers that I had in my master's program at the College of William & Mary, the guy's name is Paul Heidemann. And part of his research that he actually did was called folded lists, or these minute lists, where he was a biology teacher. And then he also did stuff with the School of Education. And so essentially what he had was you would take a sheet of paper and you would fold it 4 times. So it'd be front, back. And then so you would write basically a word, and then you would do a drawing of that word. And so you would have to go back between word to drawing to word to drawing. And so you would just like keep doing that process. over and over and over again. And essentially then you could encode a whole bunch of information that you had in your brain into essentially like a 2-word phrase or a 5-word phrase. And then you could also encode it into like a really interesting drawing. So for example, in the class that he was teaching us with, we were actually doing parts of the brain. And so we had to do like these sort of minute sketches, and it should basically take no more than a minute. You can practice them anywhere. They're really wonderful tools. And so encourage anybody to look up his work. But basically, again, using sketch notes of, okay, you've thought about this thing, great. Like how can you visualize that? Because the way that you visualize it is going to be different than the way that Sandy visualizes it. That's going to be different than the way that I visualize it. And then the cool part, we could actually all three of us share our visualizations and say, oh, okay, like these are some similarities. These are some differences. Oh, why did you draw it this way? Why did I draw it this way? Why did Sandy draw it that way? And that's the learning process. And that's something that anybody could do. Again, for any topic that they're learning, any age, this is a really, really fun thing. Something I would suggest is, take what you're thinking about in your brain that you had from receiving information through audio, and then can you draw something that would be a visual representation of that? And I think as you continue to practice that skill as well, then you will get better at sort of automatically doing that in your brain as you're listening to stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to see an example of it sometime, Nathan, when you come visit again. I would love to see you show us exactly what that looks like. Because again, visual, for those who are visual learners, that would really help us, understand conceive what you're talking about. That'd be great.
Yeah, and you know what it reminds me of is I remember, and I'm trying to think. It was either a child. I think it was second grade or third grade, and I had a child who was really struggling with reading, and I'm not sure what their disabilities were, but somebody told me take a card, a 3x5 card, and write the word on it, and then turn it over and have them draw a picture of whatever the word depicts, and then to construct a sentence under that picture that connected to the picture. And then, then they would have word cards, and then eventually that schema that they came up with is going to transfer to that word.
Right.
And
we always just call that word association in early learning, where we would have all of our shelves labeled with the actual item, and then have the word that went with it. And kids were able. It was amazing. 3, 4, and 5-year-olds would be able to learn the words based on what they were observing and then seeing on the card. So that's a great way of learning.
Well, and one thing too, and I don't know if it was on your website, but somewhere a couple months ago, I read an article on the importance of background knowledge. And in reading, being a reading teacher, background knowledge is key, but that, like you say, has to do with the words associated with the picture, associated with what I know about it. And in order for kids to really become good comprehenders, which is about third grade, second or third, they get good, they need to have that background knowledge of those words and what they mean, and so that even when they talk to you, they understand what you're talking about. So that's great.
I'd written I think a couple of newsletters ago was about the underrated power of background knowledge.
That must have been your website.
It does. Definitely knowledge does compound on itself. Knowledge and skills compound. It's it's interesting to see. And, I think you may know the studies more than I do, but, the studies of where, students from various families in terms of the number of words they've heard, by the time they enter, kindergarten at age 5, like, some students have heard millions of words. Some students have only heard hundreds of thousands, and some tens of thousands, and some only thousands. Right. And as early childhood teachers, you were very, very easily able to tell the students that had adult interactions or didn't, or obviously, I guess this was probably pre-iPad days, but like the ones that were just kind of in front of, unfortunately, in front of a television, versus the ones that were having real conversations with adults, with their caretakers.
Or people reading to them,
right.
And then talking to them about things. I mean, it's even, when you're pregnant, it's important to talk to your baby and play classical. People don't like classical music because they like it. They like it because they've heard it. You
Right.
know, it puts imprints in your brain. And absolutely, that's their background knowledge. And, you know, as you travel around the world, the same thing. You've seen things, you've seen cultures. It enriches your understanding of stuff.
Yeah.
So, what else well, Sandy, how would you describe your learning? And let Nathan unpack for you how you learn.
I'm definitely kinesthetic learning, and the fact that I like the whole ball of wax. I like to be able to hear, see, and actually do, because it cements it in my brain. But one of the things I was just thinking when we were talking, Nathan, is that when we were talking about bilingual learners, because we have a lot of Spanish-speaking families and children in our program, the best way to teach them the language is to actually set up a scenario like the red ball is rolling, and be able to put that with the words that we were using as we were doing that, because that did that connecting that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, you know, again, the idea of, again, everybody has to practice and perform, right? That's part of the learning process as well. You know, again, kind of what you just said, or, you know, the funny stories of people, you know, you try to learn French and then all of a sudden you end up in Paris and try to order a baguette the first time, and you know, the waiter looks at you like, sorry, you want to go to the toilet? You want to go? I'm sorry, what are you asking for? You want
Your pencil and draw the picture, right?
I can't even imagine how I could mess that one up.
So yeah, so, you know, again, practicing and performing is something that's really important for the learning process as well. And really, I think, you know, you can argue, or, you know, I certainly would put an argument for that. You know, again, you can't know what somebody knows, or even what you think you know, unless you actually try to have some output, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, again, I know there's sort of various different ways to think about the learning process. I've kind of come down to in sort of the work that I've done, or as I was making these courses, I really, you know, again, it's not maybe the greatest sort of model, but sort of input, processing, output. You know, I know is sort of a computer-based idea, and there's other ways to think about it, but I like it. I like that because, again, it really does focus like, hey, there is an output, and you have to be able to output. And if you can't output, then we can't tell.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
you can tell me that you know this all the time. Or it was always, you know, going back to, you know, my high school physics teaching days. Physics is one of those ones where if you don't put in the time trying to solve problems, then you're in major trouble when you get to a pencil and paper test.
Right.
And so students are like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And, you know, as we're doing practice in class, I'm like, it's going to hurt a lot.
It's apparent that they don't have that.
Yeah, I like to go back. Yeah, I like to go back to Bloom's all the time because, you know, it starts out with knowledge, which is kind of your word base and, you know, some of the familiarity with words. Then you move on to understanding, which is, you know, I can maybe tell you about it. But the third one is application. And if I can't get to application, then I don't really know it very well. And I can't get to the higher order stuff until you know, then I go to analysis and synthesizing, you know, and on up the ladder, but you can't, you have nothing unless you've got the bottom core. So no, that's true. So I heard Sandy talk about her being, I'm going to use the word global learner. She's whole to part. And I've worked with many people, I mean, teams especially. I like to help them work together. And there'll be people that are whole to part, want to start with the big picture, and they don't even understand the details till you give them the big picture. And then the part to whole people need the data and the details before they can get to the whole picture. Tell me a little bit more about that and working with people in your classroom that have different styles.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that, you know, again, the ability to sort of expand and contract, you know, think about an accordion, right? Just as an instrument that expands and contracts of how can you, you know, sort of meet people where they are with both sets is really maybe the hardest. I mean, that's the one of the main important things of leadership, you know, whether it's teaching or coaching, or, you know, as you're doing leadership coaching as well for teachers or for, you know, business people or whatever. You know, I think that trying to find out, okay, yeah, what is the vision that we have for this thing? And sort of like, hey, here's at least like the ultimate big picture of where we're trying to go. And then, all right, what are the different paths and different parts that we can take in order to try to get to that? I think that this is just a hunch, but I think that even the people that try to work from part to whole, they still benefit from understanding at least the highest order bit in terms of like, what are we actually trying to go for here?
Right.
And you can, at least as you're dealing with the parts, you can start to see how they're going to stack together to get us to the highest part. And then I think that also helps the whole people who are like, okay, like, again, here's something to grasp onto. And so now, again, as we're all building the frameworks in our brains of what are the things we're trying to do, then both sets of people can attach to what they need to attach as we're going on.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm an example of math. Math and I were not friends, and I had a hard time, especially with algebra and geometry, because getting the basics and then layering it with more knowledge, boy, I was lost. But I remember taking home ec back in the day, learning how to sew and looking at a pattern that was showing me what I was trying to come up with. And that was much more concrete operational to me than trying to figure out math equations and that kind of thing. It was just a huge difference in the outcome because of how I could process it.
Well, I think what I find in teams is the toleration of people that are different than me. You know what I mean? So the whole to part people need to understand that they need the parts to complete the whole. And the same with the part people need to understand they need the whole, so that, I encourage them to both come to the meeting with their part and then to have discussions, because the whole to part people get confused when they have all the details, and the detail people get bored when the visionary person starts to ramble on about the goal. So they have to kind of meet in the middle. And so an awareness of it's important. And yet I know, as a whole to part learner, I want to get better at understanding the details. I guess I have to put it into context or something.
And it's interesting also in some of the work I've done and thinking about, because I've been on a bunch of airplanes in my life, and so thinking about and obviously don't get this high, but going all the way from like 100,000 feet to 10,000 to 1,000 to 100 to 10 to 1, and so like those are, for me at least, in terms of teaching, there's 6 levels. Probably argue there's more, probably argue there's less, but that was just some sort of nice whole numbers to go from like, stage 1 is like, hey, what am I doing in the classroom in the next 30 seconds or the next 2 minutes?
Sure.
The 10th, to stage 10 or the 10-foot view is like, what are the goals and objectives of this lesson, right?
Sure.
And then it's trying to connect it all the way to the top. And so being able, that would maybe be an interesting challenge for the people that you're leadership coaching of, hey, can you break down, like, what are we trying to do? And can you come up with how many different levels?
Yeah.
Whether it's 3, whether it's 5, 6, maybe 6 is the max. I don't know if you want to try to create 10 levels unless you're doing, I don't know, I guess the people that do like K-12 curriculum planning probably have over 13 levels, right?
I don't know if they go that detailed, but they should.
Right. But it'd be an interesting maybe challenge for your leadership, the people that you coach in terms of your leadership of, hey, again, hold apart people. Great. Like, cool. Start up here, start with the 100,000 foot view, but can you fill in the rest of the table? And then challenge the other set to, okay, you want to start down here? Great. Now let's go up here. And then you get to have some fun conversations of sort of that messy middle of what are the steps that we think we need to take? What are the ways that we need to look at? What's the data we need? Because again, you're right. Like a vision without, a vision just as itself, it can be motivating, but that only lasts for a couple of days, and you're like, actually, wait, what am I doing? What am I doing now? Like, I don't understand how my daily actions attach to this. But then on the flip side, sometimes if you're just doing actions, you're just like, okay, we should have taken a left, but we took a right, and you're like, oh my God, now we can't get right.
Yeah, I like that. It would be a good way to create those benchmarks at each place. What are the outcomes I need before we can move ahead? It really makes a lot of sense. How, with working with high schoolers, how important is it for you to, or do you help them create an awareness of how they learn?
Yeah, so that was actually something that was really fun. So as again, I was kind of going through the doctoral process and realized that, some of my stuff wasn't some of the ways I was doing things in the classroom were not aligning with sort of really good principles of learning or science of learning practices. It was fun to be like, hey, I'm going to try something new. This is actually something that goes along with seems like how people learn, and so we're going to try this. And the students really responded to that. I think that it was really an interesting thing, to see the positive response. And then, as I continued on, that was actually sort of like one of the very first. I even made a video for them. It was like because we did flip classroom, and so maybe the first one, maybe the second one of the very first videos was like, hey, we're not talking about physics right now. We're going to talk about how you learn, and this is like. And the other interesting part too is because the courses that I created were relatively intricate in terms of like the style of stuff. And so I needed to also like explain like, hey, here is literally why I created this course the way that I did. And this is why exactly how it attaches to how people learn. And so we didn't have a lot of time in class together, but we were able to use the time in class really well. It was also fortunate that students were really good. They definitely put in time outside of class to do their practice and make sure that they were on the right track.
Sure.
But one of the funniest ones was actually, so in AP Physics C, we taught both mechanics and electricity and magnetism. So it's a calculus-based AP Physics class, really a fun class to teach, but we didn't have that much time. And so, what our assessment system actually is, we broke it into basically 8 topics in the fall semester and 6 in the spring semester. Every topic had 3 assessments, mandatory 3 assessments. And so they were scaled and they were scored. And so basically like pretty much every 3 or 4 classes, they had an assessment on something. And then we would sort of do a spiral, and then they would take an assessment again, and then we would spiral, and then they would assess again. And I was like, hey, you're going to really not like me for a while, but then you're going to understand that you're going to like me. And so really trying to
well, you're getting to know your audience that way, knowing what they knew and what they didn't know.
And that's the point.
And flexibility is the name of the game. From what you're sharing with us today, we just got a call from our daughter who's a registered nurse, and she was having to do some certification, and she's now in her 40s, and she said, I can't believe how I have forgotten to study. I'm looking at this material. I have done this stuff ongoing, but I'm looking at this and getting ready, and it's a high stakes thing, and I feel lost. And again, going back, Nathan, to how to study, because I tell you what, we have to review what the process is.
So tell me, what were the results of that, the thing that you did with the students? Did their learning increase because of how you were teaching it and scaling it?
Yeah, I think so. Again, the AP scores at that school are really, really good, and I would like to think that at least part of it was the way that we sorted out the thing. And sometimes, but again, they were very good students. Don't get me wrong; they definitely put in their studying.
Yeah.
They did the work throughout the year. They also did their studying before the assessment. And again, lots of them scored to the potential that they showed. And the other funny point that I had actually made to them, I was like, I'm going to use your desire to cram against you, because you have to cram 3 times. And I was like, that's actually how you learn. And so I was like, you want to cram
repetition, yeah.
But basically you have to do it at least 3 times. And then they're like, oh, you got it. So yes, I got you. And so
the night before, right?
Right. It's like, look, cool if you want to cram, but you got to do it 3 times, and you're gonna learn stuff. Yeah. This is how it works.
Yeah. Did you find some of the students became more motivated when they started to learn how they learned?
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think that you had the students that were very happy. The school had a very strong math and science. Many students were very interested in math and science, and so you had a lot of them that were interested anyway. And so I think they really got a kick out of again, comparing themselves to where they were on the first assessment and trying to do better on the second one and trying to do better on the third one. And then also some of them, again, when they took that first one, they're like, oh, I did not do nearly enough practice problems. And it gives them a benchmark to where, again, and that's, so it's interesting to think about, what is your philosophy of assessment, right? And so it turns out that I want to assess a lot of little assessments that count for a little bit. We're gonna do a lot of them. And so it's lower stakes. It's not the end of the world. If you do terrible one of them, okay, sure, it's going to ding your grade a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. You're not going to get, destroyed by this. And so, so I think that was a really important way that they then understood, like, hey, we got to keep up with this class. That was also another part too. Like there are other, depending on other ways that classes are set up, students can kind of just not do that much. And a lot of students that we had as well, again, they're active in everything. They're active in student government. They're athletes. They're in music. And it's like, I'm not trying to say that my class should be the most important thing in your life. Like, you have you need to sleep. You need to enjoy time with your family and your friends. Like, great. I'm very happy with all of this. But it gave them markers to say, like, okay, in 4 days, I have another assessment. Again, this is not ultra stressful. This is not a high stakes thing, but I got to keep up. I can't just not do, or if they knew the consequences, if they didn't do anything, then they may do fine, especially if they were paying attention in class, because again, they were all really good in class. But at the same, not all of them, but most of them were really good in class. And so it's like, okay, if you don't do any extra work or you don't get yourself prepared, okay, no problems. Like, again, it's life, right? And try to help students understand how to organize themselves in terms of taking responsibility, in terms of taking agency. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest things that, as I've been thinking about how to share this with other people as well, is I think the term agency is such a big one, helping people take control of their life. Like, what do you want out of life? And I think that's what makes me excited about, obviously I had a lot of fun working with high school students, and actually, some of my work is targeted towards students to help them. So, having, schools, basically purchase the courses to share with students. I actually had a really, my courses are on a platform called EduSpark, and there was some sort of schools in Asia. Actually, it looked like the entire school went through this with their students, because all of a sudden it was like 35 teachers had completed the class. I was like, that's an amazing thing. Like, they all went through this thing. Specifically the one that I made for students, for high school students, really. And that's such a powerful thing, because again, we're trying to share this. Like, I feel like the earlier that you can learn how you learn about the process of learning. Again, you're not going to understand it perfectly the first time, but as you can do that, you can, I think almost you can gain wisdom, you can gain understanding about your life. You can understand, like, hey, if I need to change something, I know the process of how to do that. And to me, that's a really powerful feeling. And it really, that's the thing that I get excited about sharing with people. Again, I love talking about the learning process, but I want people to realize the best version of themselves. And that's what I want to share. And so that's what I get excited about.
Well, and I don't know if you did any collection of data about the transfer from what they learned in your class into what they were learning, like in music and inside, the other areas. And I'm sure there was transfer, that they.
Yeah, that would have been really interesting. We didn't collect any data, but it'd be fun to talk about them, or even the ones where you see them coming after they're coming back, even overseas or even in the US, and they're like, oh, like my freshman physics class was so easy. Like I was teaching everybody else because of what we did in your class, and it's like that's just like such a gratifying feeling, because you bet, right? Just like the ones that maybe even didn't do so well. Had one guy in particular that I remember that he was a really good person. He just was kind of like senioritis to the max, and he didn't mind, but then he must have done more than I thought he did, because he did a great job. He was, I saw him the next semester. He was like, man, like, your class is great. Like, I'm doing so well in college. It's like, that was fantastic. I'm happy for you.
Good.
Some people do kind of get it, and I have a story, and maybe you can break my story. Like Sandy, I struggled often in math, and it was often because I did not have good teachers. They didn't explain things, and I didn't get it automatically. And so people I know who are really good in certain subjects, and math is one of them, and science can be one of them. Uh, they aren't very good at teaching other people because they don't know how to explain how they got it. You know, my dad was that way. He was an accountant, and I remember crying in fourth grade. We were supposed to learn something about the big 7 division thing, and I showed it to him, and he goes, "That's not how to do it." And he'd just give me the answer, and I'd say, "Daddy, I have to know how to do it. I can't just have the answer." And my husband tends to be that way too. He just gets it.
Yeah.
So, have you experienced people like that, and how do you crack that egg?
Yeah, I think it's basically, I think the sort of like technical term, I think, is like the expertise effect, which basically is you forget what it felt like, or you forget sort of the intermediate.
Right. Right.
And so, so it is fascinating because I was not actually that good I was a physics major, but I was probably like last in our class in terms of like actually doing physics. I was a good physics researcher, but I was not a good physics theoretician, partly because I didn't put in the time. And so but I think that actually is, interestingly enough, I actually think that helped in my teaching career, because I remember how challenging physics was and is. And so I was trying to set up my classes to be like, hey, if you just do the work, the set of classes, like setup for this class is gonna basically force you to do well. And so I think that people who know a lot about their subject, I think it's really useful, again, to interrogate, what are the things that are foundational, and to really almost go like part to whole, or go whole to part to whole, and really say, okay, like if I was trying to teach this thing to somebody, what are the foundational things that I needed to do, or what are the foundational things you need to know, and then how do we build off of that? Right. And I do know that there are, I guess on a sort of a side note, there are dynamic systems where things do change. Like if once you add parts to a system, the system acts differently. Okay, that's a fair point, but you should also be able to understand that. Okay, or what's at least the simplest system that works together? Then if we add something and it changes, okay, how do we talk about how it changes? And so I think that so anybody listening that's trying to explain something that people in your life don't understand, and actually for me, this is pretty hilarious because, again, I have, with my small children, sometimes I explain stuff and I'm like, oh, that was to the high schoolers. That was my explanation. It's like, okay. What do I got to do to
get on down, Dad?
And not as many words. So,
cartoon bubble above their head.
I don't know what to say. So, but being able to do that, I think, is such an interesting thing. And even, again, it was a fun challenge, or it is still currently a fun challenge as I'm doing work trying to explain the learning process. Again, I'm appreciative to having this conversation, because even this is challenging me in ways that I'm like, oh yeah, like that's actually a cool way to think about it. And I think that's a fun, to me, that's just a fun part of life, is trying to figure out ideas that you can share with people. Because I just think that it's just so beautiful, and it's part of being human. And I think that it's something that, I don't ever want to lose. And I think it's something that is really interesting, I think, at this moment in time, especially given the sort of the chat, obviously the major companies with being able to have conversations with machines is such an interesting thing. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's fascinating with being able to have dialogues with real humans who know stuff is going to be, or is still, and is going to continue to be an important part of how we learn. I'm not saying the machines can't do it, because I do think that there is useful ways that, like, I think that one of the interesting parts of using machines is coming up with what are, okay, here's variation on theme. Like, we're trying to learn this thing, especially if it's foundational knowledge and skills. We need to, again, going back to your math example, we need to do like x plus 5 equals 10. We need to do like variation of those like 30 times. And I know it's tedious and kind of boring, but there's ways to make it fun. You can gamify it, all that type of thing. But that's actually how you learn how to do those knowledge and skills, because it's like, instead of doing x plus 5 equals 10, you can do x plus 7 equals 10, or you can change x plus 5 equals 12. And so you can vary things. And so, like, instead of having a human, because humans obviously can come up with that, but you can use the machine to say, like, hey, make me 50 of these, and it can do it in 20 seconds. Sure. And then you as the expert can say, okay, like, that's a great set. Okay, now my learner needs to practice 20 of these,
Yeah.
right? And so there's ways that the machines can come up with, and as you get more complex, again, there's different things with those. But, and sorry to take this there, I don't know if you necessarily want to take a direction, but I do think that like having conversations with people to work out what you're trying to say is
Well,
not
for
a discussion thing, but being able to then
And you're talking about practicing a skill, Nathan, and that's how people learn.
Right.
When I'm in an early childhood education position or whatever, you give the child opportunity to go over and over and over, because that's how they become successful. It's just like a child learning how to walk. They have to fall, get up, fall, get up, fall, get up. You're
well, in our brain, repetition is what creates those new grooves in our brain.
Right.
And we can't get away from that. And we want some of those skills to become automatic.
Right.
And they won't become automatic through, you're right, the AI can make the worksheets for us, but I had an engineer guy who came to work with me. We were working with kind of challenging students at Bates Technical College. And what he did, he would put the math problem on the board. He would go up to the board with the student, and he wouldn't do a thing. He'd watch them do it. And then he'd out, and that was wonderful for him because he wasn't throwing out, he already knew the answer to them. That didn't help them learn, but he could kind of troubleshoot where they were missing the mark.
Right.
And it was very, very helpful to them. And actually the students after the first week loved it. They weren't intimidated at all. But unless you do that process, it's not getting up here. And this is where it needs to be, because the wisdom doesn't come without knowledge and experience. Then the pieces start coming together, but they don't come together automatically.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's
the analogy that I like to use for the sort of the brain cell, the neuron connections, is kind of when you first learn something, it's basically like a twisty, winding mountain road. And so it's very narrow. It's very, a bunch of switchbacks. Like think about the most mountainous road you've ever driven on, and, and how challenging that it is. But then basically as you do it over and over and over, the brain cells start to rewire themselves, and they basically become really, really tight. And so then to me, that the next set of the analogy, the end is basically like a super wide flat road, right? And so you can just there's way more information. The information gets passed way quicker. Again, as you have sets of knowledge and skills in your brain rewires itself, which is challenging. Again, I think another interesting part of this is trying to help people maintain their motivation to the point where they can build in and see like, oh yeah, like I actually do know things, because that was one of the challenges, just in teaching in general is, again, it is hard. And learning in a real way is hard, right? Like rereading is not a way that you should practice, because it's really not doing anything for your brain. And so you actually have to try to practice. You have to try to perform and see what those outcomes are. And then that's what rewires your brain. But that's hard to do. It's hard to make yourself do it. And that's part of why we have sort of organized education. But again, ultimately at the end of the day, if people understand how to do it, then it just gives them, again, much more agency within their own lives.
Well, and as you talk about wanting people to become their best selves, we have to not only create those new neural pathways, but we have to cover up the old ones of the old bad habits and the old negative self-talk, and that takes work,
right? And
repetition, and repetition with the fact that you believe what you're saying. It's just not a empty affirmation. It's something you believe and want, and then it will have some gravity in your brain.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Nathan, I would love for you to come back on and show us the card system that you were talking about. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Because like I said, it's again concrete, operational for people that need to be able to see it, to be able to use it as a tool. So I'd love to have you show us that.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah, we can find. Dr. Newman actually wrote a book on learning, and I think it's a free book, and I can find that reference as well. And in that book, he actually explains the process. But I could have some examples
That'd be really
Pipe
great. That would be really
show
helpful.
that as well. So
Yeah, I would love that.
Well, I had two questions, but I'm only thinking of one of them. I want to send people to your website and have them sign up for your newsletter.
thank
Because
you.
the last newsletter that you wrote had to do with, you had some mini courses or something?
So basically on the website, so it's learningengine.club is the website. So you can see kind of on the bottom of my little screen there. So the Learning Engine, but is the name of the company. But if you just do, so Learning Engine and then .club, so club. learningengine.com was taken. So it is a club. We're hoping to have a club of learners.
Right.
Yeah, so I thought that was also important. So yeah, learningengine.club. And so then the sign up there, actually on the main screen, basically it says choose your adventure. And so there's essentially 8 sort of sections with various courses. And so they're short courses. Again, I will also say that, if you are a leader of superintendent or something like that and want to get this out to lots more students, certainly the pricing is flexible. We can talk about that versus what you may see on the screen. But essentially we have educators and students, and we have parents, are those 3, because I think those are all important, and especially sort of given the rise of people homeschooling their children, which fair point, or however you're doing your child's education. I think it's important for parents to know as well. So those are 3, and then basically coaches and athletes. So I think it's important for, again, for coaches of what sports, arts, whatever it is.
Sure.
And then we have people from the corporate world. So business leaders, learning and development professionals. So in the corporate world, obviously the L&D teams, or at least in the big companies, they're responsible for training people. And so again, knowing the science of learning or how to learn, to me, they're teachers as well. And so that'd be useful. And then the last one is just lifelong learners. So anybody that's just loves learning and wants to further their own education, again, all of those are available. So there's the 8. And so part of my goal, the next set of things. So there's one, and I will say also for professional educators who are looking for a 3-hour graduate class. So I have a 3-hour graduate class with Fresno Pacific University. So I know that I've had quite a few people go through that class now in terms of their recertification hours and all those types of things. So that's on there, with a link to that's there. Yeah. But then the next part of my goal is to create more classes, basically for more short courses for everybody, so that we can have a nice series of courses that, again, because we know, as we've talked about, repetition is key. And so we're going to keep working on things in terms of that. So so learningengine.club, and then choose your own adventure for whatever sort of one of those 8 that you feel the most attached to. And then also there is a link to the newsletter on there.
The newsletter is very informative and good.
Well, I appreciate that.
So before we close, just a little, what piece of advice would you give Sandy's daughter who's trying to remember how to study?
That's a great question. I would say to figure out ways to basically test yourself. So if it's I guess it's an interesting point, because I would assume that the makers of the assessment will share sort of like, is there an application section? Like, do you have to write about stuff? Because that's a little bit of a different skill set than just answering, and not that multiple choice questions can't be only knowledge based or whatever, but I would say for the sort of the type of questions that are just like, hey, do you know the meaning of this thing? Or like, hey, what's the steps to do, do the Heimlich maneuver or whatever it is, right? Like, just as an example, that was the first nursing example that came to my head. But for all of those things where it's just like, hey, you need to know this definitions by heart of these 500 words. There's a system called, I think it's ANKI, which is like Anki. And so it's basically like a structured system of flashcards. And there's various websites around on the internet that'll say like, hey, like essentially you got this one right. Okay, I'll show it to you in 10 cards. And if you get it right again, then I'll show it to you in 50 cards. And so you just take 20 minutes a day and you're just going through those, like, or you sit on the bus or you're waiting the grocery line, just pop up the thing on your phone and just pop through them as fast as you can. Sure. So that would be one section. And then if there is, or assuming there's sort of an application section, then trying to find examples of ways that you can practice those. And so actually this could be an interesting thing. Again, not that the machine is always right, but it could be, finding your favorite AI tool and saying, hey, I'm trying to prepare for this thing. here's the style of questions, create a question for me. I'm going to type in an answer. And at least at this point too, like there's probably rubrics and scoring guides. So you can actually, I'm sure you can upload the rubrics, upload the scoring guides and say like, hey, use this as an example. Or if you've never even taken them before, that's another one too, right? So if they have prepared assessments, you can actually, you could see the assessment, you could do your own answer and then look at the scoring guide and like, okay, did I get all of that right? Did I get it partially right?
Oh, awesome.
So that would be the thing. So basically, I guess the ultimate answer is you got to practice, you got to perform. And then you also have to know like, what's the benchmarks that you're trying to get to?
Yeah.
She said that the trick about that is that there's a lot of answers that could be viable answers. I want you to pick the best answer.
Yeah.
So it's multiple choice. A lot of it's multiple choice, which, you need to know your stuff to know what the best answer is. Because she said there's answers that they'll put in there that would work, but they want the very best answer. So that's a little tricky.
Yeah.
Sliding scale.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's, again, that's one way to make the multiple choice more interesting because those are,
Right.
as we all know, multiple choice are
Right.
bears, right?
On her toes.
Eliminate, yeah. So, Nathan, what is one takeaway from our conversation today?
I think that, again, just having people understand that they do have agency in their life. Again, I know that there's lots of things happening in our world where people may not feel like they have the opportunity or the skills or the knowledge. And I just think that that's something that is, having the mindset of like, okay, I can change my situation, right? Whatever that situation is, it may be really uncomfortable. It may require a lot of effort and a lot of energy, but I know I can change it. And being able to once you get into that mindset, then you don't feel like anybody can really do anything to you because you have the skills, and especially if you have a partner that is aligned with that, then that that's really where you can get to 1 + 1 = 20, right? In terms of being able to say, hey, what's this? This is beautiful. We're going to do this together. I'm fortunate to have an amazing partner, and my wife is wonderful. And so, again, we both have that same mindset. And so I think that one of the things that's really important is, and one of the reasons why I love talking about this so much is that I truly do think that learning how to learn is a foundational skill that every human in the world should know how to do. No matter how old you are or young you are, there's ways you can start talking about this, again, even to our young daughters, we're talking about learning all the time. And so I think it's just a really, really important thing to give people agency, to be able to have people take agency for their own life. And so I'm really glad that thank you for the opportunity to share that, because I do think it's such a powerful thing. And then, again, the rest of the things that you're trying to learn in life can feed off of that.
Yeah. Sandy, how about you? What's your one takeaway?
I remember there's one thing that my dad told me when I was growing up. He said, people can steal anything that you own, but cannot steal your knowledge. So whatever you take in your brain that becomes a part of who you are, nobody can take that away from you. And I think that's pretty powerful.
What I'm taking away, and it jumps off what you just got done saying, Nathan, about lifelong learning and agency, is I think almost one of the most important leadership skills is curiosity, because then I can come into any situation and have some, what about this? What about that? And, kids have that natural tendency to be curious. But as adults, if we practice that habit and it's neurologically locked in our brain, then we can always be curious, no matter how old we are.
Yeah.
So, learningengine.club, right?
That's right.
Is that right? Okay.
Learningengine.club. There you go.
Put that on the notes, and we want you back for the
Sure.
full paper. And would you hang on just for a second after I close here? Got to find out where I am. I don't know where I am. Oh, come on. Where are you? Oh, there it is. Stop recording. There it goes.